This is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast of booktopia.com.au. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and today, for lovers of light-hearted, fun, romantic, breezy reads, I have the podcast for you. First up, Sarah McDuling sits down with the one and only Emily Henry to discuss her latest book, Book Lovers, dropping on May 3rd. And then Ben Hunter sits down with Toni Jordan to discuss her new book, Dinner with the Schnabels. Check the show notes below for timestamps of all interviews. Now, over to our interview with Emily Henry, author of Book Lovers.
Hi, I'm Sarah McDuling, and I am super excited to be talking today with Emily Henry, bestselling author of Beach Trees and You and Me on Vacation, about her upcoming release, Book Lovers. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
So for the people listening who haven't been as lucky as I am to have read this book, can you tell them a bit about what to expect in Book Lovers?
Yeah, so Book Lovers is about this very type A, ambitious career woman who's a literary agent. Her name is Nora Stevens. And Nora has this problem, which is that she keeps getting dumped for women who are her polar opposite, women who are sort of small town sweethearts who, you know, come from these big loving families and don't really care about like material things and, you know, like live in small quaint towns and love that life and all of that. And she keeps getting dumped for this other kind of woman. And so because of that, her younger sister Libby convinces Nora that what she really needs to do is have her own sort of transformative small town love story like her exes keep having. So Libby and Nora go away to this small town in the mountains of North Carolina for a whole month to kind of complete this checklist of, you know, small town love story tropes and that sort of thing. And while Nora is there kind of trying to see if she can have this small town love story that changes her view of the world, she keeps running into her nemesis from back in New York City, Charlie Lastra, who is an editor who turned down Nora's book a couple of years prior and in kind of the most insulting way. And ever since then, she has really disliked this man. And they just keep running into each other. So it's sort of my take on like the stereotypical Hallmark, like Christmas movie. It's not a holiday book, but the whole, you know, small town sweetheart changes like a city person's life. It was my take on that, where I wanted to kind of use the same narrative structure, but put Nora kind of in combat with this person who actually was like just like her.
I love Nora so much.
Thank you.
I have to say, she's such a great character. And I love how you took that familiar stereotype that I think we've all seen, that slick, blonde, career-driven, Peloton-owning girlfriend who ends up getting dumped when the hero meets the nice, wholesome, small-town girl.
Right.
And just overturned the whole thing by making her the heroine. Where did your first spark of inspiration for Nora come from? Was she inspired by a particular example of that character type or more general?
It was more general. It was because actually I was watching, you know, kind of a flurry of Hallmark Christmas movies. And I really do love that story. So that I feel like I need to get out ahead of time, you know, like I tend to toy with tropes and kind of tease them and all that, but I'm almost always using something that I like just do love. And so even though I love that structure, I did notice that the morality of it, when you see so many of the same story, you start to think like, this isn't just making a statement about like, oh, this is what this one particular character needs for her life. She actually wants to be in the small town with like, you know, the country doctor or whatever. It starts to feel more like an overarching statement about what is the right kind of woman and what is the right kind of life and what makes a good woman and a woman deserving of love. And so I was kind of curious to play with that, but just beyond that, I think I'm really fascinated by sort of the more iconic of those characters, like Meredith Blake in the Parent Trap remake and The Devil Wears Prada. I am blanking on the character's name, but everyone knows her. I'm just really fascinated by how often we kind of present this character who's this woman who has everything, and she walks into the office in the morning and she throws her coat in her assistant's face, and her coffee's not hot enough, and she, works until like it's pitch black in the office. And I was really curious to kind of play with that character and see what made that character that way. And I think so much of fiction for me is about building empathy and understanding people better. And so it was really fun to take this character who we do have all these little things that we take as kind of shorthand for, like, she's shallow and she's bad or whatever. And I wanted to see where those little cliche details actually came from. Like, why does this woman love her Peloton so much? Because she has a reason. Like, she has a reason that she loves this bike.
It really hit a note for me, because I'm my favorite example of this character type is the Baroness in The Sound of Music.
Yes.
And when you watch that, I think as a child, you're like, oh, well, she's the evil one and she doesn't get the guy. But as you grow older, you watch and you just think, man, she's a class act. Like, she's so cool. She should get her own story. And you've kind of given that stereotype her own story here with Book Lovers. Yeah,
I think, like, even as kids, all of the kind of Disney animated media that we took in, where, there's a kind of pretty that Disney would use to be like, this is a good person. She's got the big doe eyes, like the down loose hair. They're like, this is how you can tell someone's good. And then the other women, they either are like, they're ugly and that's how you know they're bad, or they have really severe eyebrows. And I have a joke with one of my closest friends who has very severe eyebrows. Everybody thinks she's so mean, like, when they meet her. And we've always, like, joked, like, it's just because you have, like, Disney villain eyebrows. Like, they just can't get past that. Like, that's all they see is you have these sharp, dark brows, and they're like, she's bad.
She's mean pretty.
Yeah. Yes, mean pretty. Exactly. You're like, she has a poison apple.
Well, I'd love to talk about tropes a little more, actually. I'm a huge appreciator of tropes, particularly romantic tropes. I can't get enough of them, and especially enjoy when people play around with them and put a refreshing twist on things, which is what you do so well. So far in Beach Read and You and Me on Vacation, you've taken, like, and correct me if there's some I'm forgetting, but you've sort of got opposites attract and rivals to lovers and friends to lovers, and now here in Book Lovers you've got a little element of enemies to lovers, but wrapped up in all these delightfully clever things you're doing with the trope of that fish out of water, big city character in a small town. And these are, like, if I were to write a list of all of my favorite things, like, these tropes would all be on that list. So what I wanted to ask you was, if you had to pick your favorite romantic trope of all time, A, what would you pick? And B, do you have a favorite example of that trope done just right?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. I think that there are so many answers, and I feel like depending on the day of the week, I would say something different. In historical romance, I really, really, really do love The Marriage of Convenience. And I think it's fun that some contemporary romance writers have kind of found ways to play with that in some form. In contemporary, I do really, really love enemies to lovers, but I also think that I think that I'm really picky about it, because I think it's such a delicate balance for me, where there are certain kinds of barbs that I'm like, oh, you just went too far and I can never accept this pairing anymore. Like, there's just a lack of respect there. But then also I think a lot of times when we talk about enemies to lovers, there really is just sort of like a couple who, like, kind of love bickering with each other in the beginning, and they're not really enemies. And in a way, Nora and Charlie definitely get off on the wrong foot, and she really, really does dislike him. But I feel like pretty quickly it's like, oh, they're just good at arguing. And I mean, I know this is kind of the simple go-to answer, but I do feel like the hating game is what taught all of us how much we love enemies to lovers. Like, all of us newer romance readers read that when it came out, and we're just like, oh no, I'm going to be chasing the high of this for the rest of my life. And I do still sort of feel that way, where it's like every Sally Thorne book, I'm just like, this is like the balm that my soul needs to go on in the post-hating game world. So I think that one is probably like my favorite example. And then also, I'm sorry, this is such a long-winded answer, but my friend Martha Hunt, who writes lovely, funny romps of historical romance novels, also talks about like the micro tropes that are just sort of like the little, you know, the sick bed thing or the one bed, you know, mini trope sort of thing. And I do really love like the sick bed trope where one person is caring for the other. It's like always appreciated, always accepted.
Also present in Hating Game. So
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I know. I think I learned so much about what works for me as a reader by reading The Hating Game. And it really taught me what I'm like looking for when I walk into the romance section of a bookstore.
I love the romance genre. But, you know, I feel like there are some that are just magic, that just really just hit the spot. I would put all of your romances in that category. So I just wanted to ask you for some insight in what you think the secret is to creating a good romance. Like, what elements do you think need to be there to really capture the hearts of your readers?
I think there's a couple of things. For me, I really do love a couple with a sense of humor. And I mean, there are just some writers who are just naturally so funny. And I think Sally Thorne is a really good example. And I think Talia Hibbert is another good example, where it's like the humor is just baked in there. And so you instantly feel like you have this very distinct viewpoint of the characters because you're seeing like what they think is funny. But I also think that there's something to be said about the kind of inconsistencies in characters. Like, that's something I'm really drawn to. Like, we're obviously going very spoiler light for this conversation, and we discussed that ahead of time. But with Charlie, I had a really fun time writing this character who seems so thoroughly like this kind of archetype that we're familiar with and love, you know, the broody kind of scowly man. But it's really funny and fun for me as a reader and a writer to pick out all the little things that don't fit with that and all the little things that are surprising. And I think when you're getting to know someone, those are so often the things that really like tickle you and make you fall in love with a person, to just be like, what? Like, you're into that? Like, I never would have guessed that you like collect antique spoons. Like, you're the whatever. That's not a real example. But I think that the things that make me really fall in love with characters and believe that they're real people and fall in love with them just wholly are just those little details that take them from being the archetypes we love to feeling like someone you could meet.
That's such a good answer.
I'm glad you think so, because I feel like I just got off a roller coaster and like, what did I was just going in circles there. But yeah, I just love the characters who get kind of messy. I think that's really what I'm drawn to as a reader.
Yes, also with humorous dialogue, which I think is an important ingredient. I also really appreciate in every one of your romances, you have really strong family and friend side characters, which I think in every romance I've ever really loved, that's always present. And I feel it must be quite hard to balance that, to have well-rounded three-dimensional side characters and still balance the romance between the two leads. Have you ever struggled with that?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, with Book Lovers, Libby, Nora's younger sister, is a pretty serious character, a pretty major character, but in earlier drafts, she wasn't. And in kind of trying to get to know Nora and Charlie better, I just found myself going back to their families so much. I think that so often, weirdly enough, like the things that we went through as kids still shape us when we're 30, 40, 50, whatever. And so in trying to get to know Nora and Charlie better, I really kept coming back to Libby and Nora's relationship with Libby. And that's how she kind of got threaded through. But at the same time, like, we've all been there where you're reading a romance novel and you're so into the couple, you love the romantic tension, and then there's sort of like the B plot threaded through, and every time you're in that section, you're like, okay, let's just get back to the couple. And that's really hard. But I think as a writer, I'm always thinking that the tension and the conflict in the main romantic relationship is usually coming from history. And so those familial relationships are actually really important to forming it. And so I think it helps with the balance to think of all of those interactions with the side characters as still being sort of essential for the romantic arc, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, total sense. I feel like, you know, again, I'll keep things spoiler free, but in Book Lovers, everything that Nora goes through with Libby, these are all like struggles that are independent from the romance, but really tied to the journey that she's on. And so it all really echoes really well in theme.
Thank you.
So I believe your first book was published, according to Wikipedia, in 2016.
Yes.
And you've published several young adult novels, as well as your 2 soon-to-be 3 romances. And I would just like to pause to say that I also love reading YA. So
Yes.
these are genres that I adore. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about sort of what it's like switching genres, or what the experience of writing young adult is versus romance, and also maybe just a little bit about your journey to publication and how that all came about.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I started writing young adult because that's what I was reading. And I think a lot of us, you know, voracious readers experienced that, where there was like Harry Potter and then Twilight, and then from there, a lot of people like in the millennial generation, especially, I feel like we're like, oh, now there are books with kind of this fast pace, this very, I say formulaic in a good way, like this sort of formulaic commercial structure, and also like a lot of attention to emotion and a lot of kind of emphasis on romance and whatever. So that was just what I was reading. And so I'd always been a writer to some extent, you know, more sometimes than others. But when I started to write seriously, I was just, you know, writing the kind of thing that I was reading. And so that was YA. And then when I graduated from college and kept writing and started querying and all of that, I was still doing YA and all that time. And I think that the thing that really excited me about it was this sort of coming of age aspect. And so with my first 4 books, it was, I wrote 3 young adult novels, and then I co-wrote 1 with a friend. And with all of those, I was kind of tuning into different pieces of the coming of age story, or different variations of that. And I loved that, and I still might do more of that at some point. But at a certain point, I think I started having like my late 20s crisis, and was like, oh, it's happening again. Like no one had ever told me, or I was just too stupid to listen, but I had no idea that there was going to be this second serious coming of age in my life, where everything felt like it was called into question, and my view of the world, my view of myself, my identity, all of that just felt hugely in flux. And I felt like I had kind of, at least for the time, you know, only having so much hindsight built up, I felt like I had said everything I could about that teenage coming of age. And then I was having all these experiences that felt kind of the same as, like, you know, when you're a teenager and like trying to figure out who you are. So I wrote Beach Read really just for myself. I didn't know at the time, I hadn't really read any romance, and I didn't really know if it was a book that would be able to be sold or anything like that. But I kind of had some downtime between YA projects, and I was just like in a dark place. The world felt very dark and scary, and I wanted to immerse myself in something that was just really fun and felt really good. And so then I accidentally wrote a book about a girl who's mourning the death of her father, as you do when you want something fun and light. But, you know, it was a love story too. And it felt like this way of sort of investigating some of these darker thoughts and feelings, and, you know, this sensation of the world being in flux. It felt like a safe way to do that, because it was all happening within this love story where I knew from the very beginning, these people are going to end up together. Like, this is going to be my version of a rom-com, which is funny, I think, but also kind of sad. And yeah, it just was such a blissful experience. I wrote it very quickly, and I didn't tell anyone about it for at least a year. It might've been 2 years before I even was like, by the way, I wrote one of these. So it was just such a good time. And it was also the first time I had written something purely for myself in a few years, because once you start actually publishing books, you do have this weird shift where you're always kind of thinking like, well, what are people on Goodreads going to think about this? Like, will they like this? Will they hate this? Instead of just thinking like, oh, what do I think that the story requires? And so having this sort of secret project that nobody asked for or wanted from me was just such a good time. And then a couple of years later, I was sort of watching kind of the post Sally Thorne like boom of contemporary romance, where Jasmine Guillory and Helen Huang were kind of blowing up and doing different cool things in the space. And so at that point I told my agent like, oh, by the way, I actually do have a book that I think is sort of like that I never mentioned because I didn't know if anybody like was reading this at this point. So the move into the romance space was just like, I kind of just tripped and fell into it and really, really loved it. But I do feel like every book that I'm writing right now is still a coming of age, and it's just that like 30-year mark. And honestly, I'm excited. I think that my characters will continue to age as I know more about the world, and I'm excited to write characters who are 40 and 50 and 60. If I get to, live as long as I'm planning on, I'll be writing 100-year-old characters at some point. So yeah, I just think it was like a really big revelation to me to realize that the coming of age like does not stop ever.
We really do just keep coming of certain ages.
Yes. And it's like terrible every time. And then you feel better afterward. We're like, can you remember your 20s? Those were awful. And then, and then next thing you know, you're like 39. You're like, oh no, it's happening again.
It never stops. It's a really good point. I feel actually we associate the coming of age so much with moving out of childhood and into adulthood, but adulthood has many stages and phases.
Yeah, and we act like you're just going to be fully baked when you're 18 years old, and unfortunately or fortunately that's not the case.
Well, okay, and so now 2022 you're an internationally best-selling author and your books are massive trenders on Booktop, which I think the whole publishing industry has realized is the best thing that can happen to a book these days.
Yeah.
Nothing is selling books like TikToks at the moment. Sorry, nothing is selling books like TikTok at the moment.
So true.
So what has that been like for you, seeing your books take off in such a massive way in that space?
I mean, it's been really wild because on the one hand, like it's been happening during a global pandemic, and, I haven't been out and about as much as I normally would. And so I'm vaguely aware that it's happening. I keep getting like the good news emails, but it also still feels sort of like nothing's changed. Like I'm still just in my house and writing my little books on my little computer. But it's really, I don't know. I am deeply, deeply, deeply appreciative of it. And I also feel like I am so glad that this did not happen for me with my first couple of books, because I feel like I would not have been prepared at all. It would have ruined me forever. Like I probably would have become just like an absolute monster in some way. And instead I'm just like, wow, this is really cool. And someday it'll go away. But right now I'm trying to just like enjoy it. And I'm so appreciative to all the Book Talk people who have really made my career what it is. And I think it's also just like a funny little reminder that teenagers have always been the ones who, I know it's not only teenagers on Book Talk, but a lot of, it's like young people largely. Yeah. I mean, I'm not on TikTok. I feel like I can't handle it. But like, it's just a good reminder that it's like young people have always kind of been the taste makers, and it's just like funny and amazing. And I feel so grateful. I'm like, you can't really deserve the kind of success that I've been given. It's always a gift. And so I'm just like in awe and very appreciative and trying to stay human and not become the worst kind of like faux mini celebrity throwing tantrums all the time.
Well, I think it's very well deserved.
Thank you.
I've read a lot of books because of TikTok, and
yes.
Like not all of them are ones where I understand the hype, but I didn't actually come to your books through TikTok. However, I totally understand why they trend there, and I feel like in this case, if you've heard hype around any Emily Henry books, it's well deserved.
Thank you so much. That's really nice.
So we're pretty much out of time, but I just wrap up asking a question that you may not be able to answer, because we're in the lead up to publication of Book Lovers at the moment. I don't know if you're able to talk about what comes after that, but do you have anything in the works that you're able to tell us about?
I do have something in the works. I don't think I can really share almost any identifying detail, but as of now, if I can get my act together, it will be out next summer. That's the hope and the plan, the schedule we are optimistically going with, and it will be in the same vein as my last three. So if you liked those, there's a pretty good chance you'll like this one. I'm definitely at that stage where it's like hour to hour is like how I feel about it. It's like, oh, I love this book and it's great. And then also like, I'm going to check my laptop out the window. So in 1 year's time, this book will be good and hopefully on bookshelves.
Well, I'm enormously glad to hear that. I need to get my Emily Henry hit at least once every 12 months.
Oh, thank you.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been such a pleasure to meet you and so wonderful chatting with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
And for everyone listening, you can grab your copy of Book Lovers by Emily Henry or any of her amazing backlist titles, all of which I highly recommend, at your local bookstore or online at Booktopia. Thanks for listening and never stop reading.
Now, over to our interview with Toni Jordan, author of Dinner with the Schnabels.
Hello, I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager. And today with me on the pod is Toni Jordan. She is a beloved Melbourne author, and I've just stuck my nose into her new creation, and I can see exactly why she counts Liane Moriarty and people like Graham Simpson among her many fans. Her previous books, 9 Days, The Fragments, Addition, and Our Tiny Useless Hearts, have seen her listed for a whole cacophony of literary prizes. And her latest book is out now, and it is called Dinner with the Schnabels. Toni Jordan, thanks for giving me some time today.
Ben, thank you very much for having me on the pod. I didn't know it was called the pod.
I call it the pod. I like the sound of the pod, so let's
like
roll with
that.
I picked up this novel, and I wasn't ready for it. I didn't think it was the book that I needed in my life, but I really did. It's funny. Your publisher Hachette describes it as heartwarming and hilarious, which is alliteration I can get behind. How did this story of modern chaos come to you?
Well, for a start, someone telling you up front it's heartwarming and hilarious is a lot of pressure, Ben, because it's very easy to fall down on the job on both those things. So I'm hoping that they landed for you. But really, it came out of the things I was streaming on television. Actually, in 2020, I watched so much television. I was just like a couch potato person. And but the shows that I found myself watching were different programs that I would have watched before. So I watched like all of Schitt's Creek maybe twice. I watched Ted Lasso. I watched all these kind of cozy, funny shows about very flawed people doing often wrong things for the right reasons and stuffing things up. And I just thought, I wouldn't mind giving a crack at writing a book like that.
That's brilliant. I have had my life saved a little bit by Ted Lasso in the last 12 months, and the amount of love for Schitt's Creek and Ted Lasso in our office circle is palpable. And this does take a note from those kinds of shows, doesn't it? Let's start with your kind of the character whose eyes we see most of this action unfurl through is Simon. And my first impression of Simon, well, you described him as a kind of adrift looking dude, and immediately walking into his world, I was like, oh, this is meant to be really funny, but it is stressing me out. Because he's not helping himself, and
No.
all of his problems they just clung to me like a like iron filings on my magnet body,
Oh my
and it weighed
goodness.
me down. But then he won me very quickly. So tell me about Simon and
Look,
his world.
he's in a bad place, absolutely. And he's in that kind of bad place where it's pretty easy to tell what he should be doing from the outside, but sometimes you just don't have it inside yourself to do those things that you need to be doing. But this is a space, I really like in fiction. I really like writing things where the reader has different ideas from the main character. So we're seeing the world through Simon's eyes. He's he's a bit hopeless. Like, I hope he's adorable, but he is kind of hopeless. So I'm hoping that the reader is in a place where they go, no, Simon, no, don't. What are you? And sort of picking up on all the things he's misinterpreting about the world around him.
Yes, and his world, it revolves around his wife Tansy, and Tansy is just the love of his life. He adores her, which is really his big redeeming thing. And their two children, Mia and Lockie, they are brilliant. But there's all of these struggles that kind of weigh them down. And Tansy, she has family. and they are the Schnabels.
Yeah.
And the Schnabels come to dinner, and I think when he says dinner with the Schnabels, that could be the title of the scariest horror film you'd ever seen. So who are the Schnabels?
Well, Simon has married into this family, Tansy's family. She has an older sister, Kylie, and a younger brother, Nick. And she also has a half sister who we meet early on in the book, Monica. And then she has her mother, Gloria. So Simon is kind of overwhelmed by this family, because they're kind of a hands-on kind of people, and they have very definite ideas about what Simon should be doing with his life. I think it's easier for Tansy herself, because she's grown up with them and she kind of knows how to manage them in her head, and she doesn't let things faze her. But for Simon, who's thrust into this family, it's all a bit challenging for him. He doesn't know the things he should be pushing against and the things he should be embracing about them. So they're kind of in his face.
Yeah, and this Monica is a new addition to the ensemble, right? She's a half sibling who has been not even estranged, like they've not met her before, and this sounds remarkable, but it happens, right? Parents separate and start second families, and it's often not until later in life that the siblings will even get a whiff of each other. And Monica, Santa Monica is someone very, very different, and it's almost like a straw to break camel's back in the world of Simon, and he's very fragile, a kind of nuclear family, which is on Struggle Street. He's between gigs. They are out of their family home. The pandemic has not been kind to them. As you say, he is struggling. And then just one more Schnabel is just enough to just set the house alight.
Yeah, it's the last thing he needs, really, because also he's a father of two. He's unemployed. He's not really looking after himself in any meaningful way. And then this much younger, kind of seemingly successful, sparky kind of person arrives on his doorstep with this rush of energy, and it just kind of makes him feel in contrast about 1,000,000 years old and completely past it. So, it just adds to those challenges. But the whole week, it's set over a course of 1 week, this book, because I really wanted something that had that pacey kind of episodic feel. And it's a bit of a challenge constructing a plot where I knew from the outset, Ben, that I didn't want anything actually terrible to happen. So no murders, no uncovering of anything, incredibly terrible. And then I was thinking, how can I still structure kind of a bit of narrative tension with pretty low stakes? So he has a week to landscape a garden because the family want to have a function in a friend's garden, and they've given him 1 week to do it. But things just keep derailing him. He just can't seem to manage to make a start of it. So, all these things kind of interrupt his flow for the week, and he just gets in a worse and worse position.
Yeah, I've read so many high stakes thrillers this year to date. But Simon getting those pavers in was something that I was just sweating literal bullets over. When they don't deliver correctly and on time, I was ready to hit the roof. I was Simon reaches for the whiskey bottle, and I was ready to reach for the whiskey bottle too. It's a lot.
That is possibly the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me about this book. But yeah, it's really because it's the small irritations of life often that throw us off, right? Like things when you look back, even a month later, you can't even remember. But at the time, it's an enormous drama. Life kind of swings between these genuinely enormous life-threatening things and these small irritations that really give us the same kind of vibe as if it was something really important. So I wanted to kind of capture that feel of none of these are big things, right? Nobody's going to die, but it's still really disruptive to your life and throws you out of whack.
So on one end of the spectrum, you have Monica crashing into things, who is a 20-something and very online and has just a completely different aura and language to everyone around her. You've got Simon and Tansy in the middle of things. On the other kind of end of the spectrum, there's Gloria, Tansy's mum, who is obviously older and has a very firm idea of how things should operate. And I think between the youth and then the next generation, they're really pincered, aren't they?
Yeah, look, Simon and Tansy are trapped in the middle. So Tansy's mother, Gloria, was really my favorite character to write. And she was just, I had to actually be a little bit judicious about the scenes I introduced her into, because every single scene she would just take over. And I had to a number of times stop and say, no, this is Simon's story. We got to focus on Simon. Like, we can't have Gloria kind of dominating every single scene that she pops into. But she's just kind of a contrary person. She's, if you stated something, she would say, absolutely not, that's rubbish. And if you then took her view, she would take the previous view. Like, she just can't agree with anybody. And she just is spiky, and she just thinks she should be queen of the world and tell everybody how to run things. And a character like that, with so much energy, that's again kind of one of the challenges of the low stakes book. Like, I can't have people just drifting around. I have to kind of summon up a bit of energy, because I don't have car chases and I don't have serial killer hunts or anything kind of dramatic going on. So I've got to keep the energy of the characters up, and she was just a dream for that.
She certainly raises the stakes. This is also a post-pandemic novel, which is interesting, in this kind of seemingly light, but actually really heavy.
Yeah, look, it was a choice.
Fiction.
It was a choice.
Yeah. Tell me about the choice.
Well, in deciding to make something kind of happy and low stakes and fun to kind of duplicate in fiction those TV shows I was watching, I wanted the sense of coming out of things. Like, everything was over. And of course, when I'm writing it, I couldn't actually know when everything was going to be over. So I had to make kind of best judgment calls about what I thought the feeling would be. So it's certainly, mentioned in there. It's a book set in the real world. I wanted it to be as realistic as possible. So there's brief mentions, but I was trying to set it now, like where we are now. So there's still things going on, and there's still stuff in the background, and there's all that, but it's not at the height of things. I don't have to dwell on it. I don't have to explain things. People have a kind of an unconscious understanding of what everybody's been through and what everything is like, and people like Simon particularly really kind of felt it hard. He was used to being the master of his universe. He had a business and he had staff and he had, he kind of imagined he had his stuff together, and then he's derailed by circumstances beyond his control. And it's very tempting to be furious at that, when really, what are you going to be furious at? A virus? Like, it's kind of a ridiculous concept. The virus doesn't care that you're mad at it.
Yeah, well said. There's a lot to be upset about in this day and age, and it's hard to direct that energy into something positive.
Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So I wanted kind of the theme of the book to be a deliberate choice about, okay, of course we can all sit around and moan about things, but how can we kind of develop a mindset that gives us a bit more resilience? And this is kind of Simon's challenge, I guess, to try and adjust his mindset so that everything is not quite as dreadful as it might otherwise be.
That's really well said. That's kind of what I wanted to ask next is, he's in this place where a wave of problems is kind of crashing over him, not enough sex, not enough money, not enough status, becoming older, becoming irrelevant, losing power to actually give his wife and kids the world that they deserve or he desires for them, and not getting those pavers in on time. But what is it that he really needs? That's kind of the question that was on the tip of my tongue reading this thing. And I think you've just nailed it. It's the resilience thing, isn't it? We have to build that again after having it all knocked down.
Because all we can really control is the stuff between our ears, right? So, if you can develop some kind of handle on how to process things in a different fashion, so you're not so continually swayed by all these external events, I think that's, like, I think he gets there toward the end. I think he does, manage it. But it's a really hard week for him. I mean, it's the little things that defeat us. His fridge breaks down, right? So, he's got to think about, how am I going to afford to get the fridge repaired, or worse than that, get a new fridge. And then he has to wait home for the fridge repairman. Like, these are not big things, but they're sometimes enough on top of everything else to just be enormously, like, just a pain. And it's these kind of, as you say, straws that can really stuff you around. But I'm hoping that the reader is thinking, come on, Simon, get it together, man. So that's kind of my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. The gorgeous early marketing copy that the publisher sends out. I love getting these books because I get to see that authors make spelling mistakes and things like that, and that they are real humans. But it just, it's got all its recommendations for bringing the book into market, and it says this is the perfect book for Mother's Day. And that kind of tempted another question in me, which is, who is this book for? I got the impression that this is a book for my mom. This isn't a book for me, but I'm like all over this. So yeah, who did you have a reader in mind when you write this, or did you just kind of write it for yourself and
I really
let it go into the world?
I really just decided that everybody needs a smile right now, and I was just gonna do my best. And that was part of the construction of the family. So I'm trying to think of characters that speak to everybody. So I've got all ages, as wide a spread as I can possibly find that's reflective of the world that I live in anyway, and sort of something that really sums up this idea about if everybody smiles on reading this book, that will just be will be all I ask for. I've written comedy before, and I do really enjoy it, even though, as I said, it's scary because nobody has exactly the same sense of humor, and it's very common to have something that I think is funny that no one else does, and it's a slightly dicey kind of operation. But I thought it was probably time to give it a go to try and really lean into that comic view of the world.
What kind of books do you look for as a reader, and has that changed over the years?
It definitely has changed over the years. I was kind of into the Russians as well when I was a young person. But now what I really enjoy is a bit of weirdness, like somebody with a view of the world that's quite strange. And I like books that are not deadly serious. Like, I know serious fiction can be gorgeous and there's enormous issues and things to be dealt with. But for me, the world is a mix of funny and sad. Like, it's not one or the other. And I most admire books that have a blend of those two things.
One more question I'll put in, because you've been profound. Do you have advice that you would give to yourself as a younger writer, or are you still figuring it out day to day?
Oh, I'm still figuring it out day to day, Ben. Like, I just want to do better. I still just want to write better books, and I try and read better books, and I try and read how to write better books about books. But I wish I had been a young writer. Maybe that's the thing. I didn't start writing my first novel until I was well in my 30s. That was my first piece of fiction, which was Addition. I wish I had have started earlier. I wish someone had said to me as a younger person that writing is the most democratic and joyous art form. You don't need any special equipment other than pen and paper. You don't need any, expensive courses or qualifications. You can get all those things, of course, but you don't need them to start. There's a million examples you can get out of the library. You can start anytime, any place, and once you begin, it'll be terrible, right? Your first attempt will be just terrible, and then the next attempt will be less terrible, and then after that, you'll get better at it. And I still find it absolutely addictive and just a joyous way to spend my time.
Well, Dinner with the Schnabels is addictive and joyous, and it may be your least terrible book yet. Toni Jordan, thank you for being on the Booktopia pod.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
And you can get a copy of Dinner with the Schnabels and all of Toni Jordan's books from booktopia.com.au.
Thanks to Emily Henry and Toni Jordan. You can find links to all books discussed today in our show notes, or head over to booktopia.com.au. Join us next week as we sit down for an episode focused on Australian stories, covering the latest releases in fiction from Australian authors, where we will be chatting with Hilda Hinton and Benjamin Stevenson. Thanks for listening, and never stop reading.